Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to 14 Divine Guides, a show that looks at the lives of the 14 infallibles, peace and salutations be upon them. Alhamdulillah, we have reached Imam Baqir salamullahi alayhi, our fifth Imam, Imam Muhammed Baqir. And with me, Insha'Allah, to discuss and look at a few points of the life of the Imam, Al-Hajj Shabbar Mehdi. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you for joining us, Haji. And inshallah we will benefit for the next 2 weeks and the next two shows with yourself on the life of Imam Baqir salamullahi alayhi. First of all, inshallah we'll start by looking at the birth of the Imam.
Sure.
And obviously the date and the actual ceremony of the birth of the Imam salamullahi alayhi.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The first thing we understand is that we are told by the Mu'arrikheen and the Imam himself, hadith from the Imam himself, that I was born 3 or some say 4 years before the death of my grandfather, Imam Hussein salamullah alayhi. Therefore we understand he was born in the 57th year after Hijrah, generally speaking. So he was around 4 years old, maybe 3 or 4 during the event of Karbala. With regards to the date of the Imam's birth, again there is a difference of opinion. The most famous, the most well known is 1st of Rajab. The second day is, for example, 3rd of Safar. As we understand, in the way that the majority of the A'imma alayhimussalam were born in Medina, the Imam in the same way. And the mother of the Imam, as we understand, was the noble lady Fatima. Fatima, this noble lady, was from the lineage of Imam Hassan salamullah alayhi. And so we find that there was something very particular and special about this birth. Why? Because this was the first birth in Ahlulbayt alayhimussalam of the A'imma alayhimussalam, where both the mother and the father were from the line of the Imams. So today we have, for example, certain Sadat, certain Sayyids who are known as Najib al-Tarafain. Najib al-Tarafain means both their father and mother is Sayyid. So the first person whose both father and mother was from Banu Hashim was Imam Baqir salamullah. So this was a very special birth. And as we understand, during the birth of all of the A'imma alayhimussalam, when they were born, all of their births were similar. For example, the mother of each Imam would, for example, be covered in light, and they would feel a bit of weakness, and next thing you know, the baby would be born. As we understand, the A'imma alayhimussalam, when they were born, they would first witness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawheed and oneness and monotheism, and of course bear witness that the Holy Prophet of Islam was the messenger, and they were the Hujjatullah al-Arth, all of the A'imma alayhimussalam. In the same way, Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi, born in Medina to the house of his holy father, Imam As-Sajjad salamullah alayhi, in this same way he was born. But the most important thing about his birth that is discussed is that both his mother and father were from Banu Hashim. And his mother, in fact, Imam As-Sadiq salamullah alayhi mentions how she was of the pious and righteous individuals. So she had a great status in the eyes of Ahlulbayt alayhimussalam as well.
Ahsantum. Looking at the naming of the Imam and his titles, obviously his name was Muhammad, but he's known as either Abu Ja'far or as Al-Baqir. Where do these titles come from, and even his name, and what do they mean?
The first thing that you have highlighted, Abu Ja'far, is if you look at the A'imma alayhimussalam, 2 of our Imams are called Muhammad, as we know. Of course there is Imam Mahdi, but 2 other than that, 2. Both have the kunya Abu Ja'far. So if you look in Ahadith, Ruwiya an Abi Ja'far, meaning Imam Al-Baqir. If it says Abu Ja'far Thani, Imam Jawad salamullah. In the same way, the Imams that are called Ali, their kunya is Abu al-Hasan, for example. The Imams that are called Hassan, their kunya is Abu Muhammad, for example. So in this way, Imam Jawad and Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi both had the kunya of Abu Ja'far, because as we know, the oldest son was Imam Ja'far Sadiq salamullah alayhi. The naming of the child again goes directly back to the Prophet of Islam sallallahu alaihi wa alih. The famous hadith which we may look at about Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari, and the Holy Prophet of Islam had already mentioned the names of each of the A'imma. In the same way, there are documents. For example, there's a document by the name of Sahifatul Zahra salamullahi alayha, which was a document that she had, within which each name of the Imam was written, next to which there was a seal. During the life of each Imam, they would then break open that seal and then pass this document to the next Imam and the next Imam and the next Imam. So we find that we understand that the names of the A'immah alayhim as-salam were already decided, had already been written by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Holy Prophet of Islam therefore had told, for example, the people that the fifth Imam will be called Imam Muhammad, his kunya will be Abu Ja'far, his title will be, as you mentioned, Al-Baqir. Of course, there are other titles. Often you'll see that many of the A'imma alayhim as-salam, they were given the title Hadi. Of course, now it is what we call Mukhtas, is specific for Imam al-Hadi salamullah alayhi. But all of the A'imma, many of the A'imma were given the title of Hadi. For example, Imam Baqir was called Al-Hadi. As-Sabir, for example, he who was the patient one. His Helm, his Ilm, all of these qualities, his clemency. Baqir, with regards to the title Baqir, we understand one thing. All of the A'imma alayhim as-salam, for example, are Baqir al-Ulum. All of the A'imma, of course, are Sadiq, truthful. Why then is one Imam given a certain title and another is given a different title? The answer came because that attribute of theirs was most apparent in their life that it became their title. For example, Imam Jawad salamullah alayhi, yes, of course his knowledge was there. He was also the splitter of knowledge, as Baqir means. But because this knowledge was not as apparent in front of the people as Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi. So because these attributes were most, as they say, dhahir in front of the people, they were given this title. And Baqir al-Ulum, or Baqaratul Ilm, Baqara, as the narrations say, the cleaver or the splitter of knowledge. In the way that I have a piece of land from which a plant then cleaves open the ground. This action is called Baqara. So the splitting open, the unveiling of the secrets. This is the actual meaning of Baqir al-Ulum, the unveiler of the inner realities of the sciences. And that's why we find Imam Baqir and his son Imam Salih salamullah alayhi were called Baqirain, for example, Sadiqain and Baqirain. So there were other also titles of the Imam that were present, and people would call him by these titles. For example, as we mentioned, Ash-Shabih. Ash-Shabih, in the sense that he looked exactly like the Holy Prophet of Islam. His mannerisms were exactly like the Holy Prophet of Islam, that he was called Ash-Shabih. But the most well-known, famous title, that attribute which was most apparent in front of the people, was Al-Baqir salamullah alayhi. So this was his main title.
So inshallah we'll look at the time the Imam lived in, and why a lot of our narrations obviously coming from Imam al-Baqir salamullah alayhi and Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, when we look at narrations inshallah. And we'll do that hopefully in today's show. You mentioned Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari there, and Jabir lived through the time of the Prophet all the way up until Imam al-Baqir, I believe. And there was greetings that was sent from the Holy Prophet. If you could tell us about that.
Yes, so as we understand, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi tells Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari. Jabir is actually one of the very important companions, because in the Pledge of Aqaba, which takes place during the life of the Prophet of Islam, Jabir was one of the first from Medina to come to the Holy Prophet of Islam and accept Islam. And then he propagated Islam in Yathrib, in Medina. So Jabir is a very important companion. Very knowledgeable companion as well. Jabir is told by the Holy Prophet of Islam, he's given glad tidings, good news, that Jabir, you will live to see up to the fifth Imam. His name will be my name. Then the Holy Prophet of Islam says something else. His mannerism will be my mannerism. How did Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari recognize the Imam? Here there are differences of opinion. One group of scholars mentioned that Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari was blind. What's their istidlal? What's their proof of this? They say during when he went to Karbala, he couldn't see the grave, so he asked who he was with to find me the grave, or let me smell. I can smell where the Imam salamullah alayhi is found. Ayatollah Sheikh Muhammad Sanad is one of the contemporary great scholars of Najf al-Ashraf. He teaches in Najf al-Ashraf. He mentions actually that Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari was not blind. The reason why he could not see on that day, on Arba'in in Karbala, was because of the great extent to which he was crying. So he had cried so much that tears had completely filled his eyes, and they were continuously flowing, that he was unable to see what was going on. So therefore he says he was able to see. he recognized Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi with his eyes. Others say no, he was blind. He heard the footsteps of the Imam. And he heard that these footsteps sound exactly the same way within which the Holy Prophet of Islam's footsteps were. Then they say Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari, when he recognizes the Imam, he gives him the greetings of his grandfather Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. And they say Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari, this senior companion, is amazed at the knowledge of Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi at this young age. Why is this narration so important? One of the reasons why this narration is so important, because it is one of the proofs of the imamah. This document is already there. This hadith has already taken place. Rasulullah has already said who the imam will be. So this is one of the very important narrations because it outlines the names of our Imam alayhi salam. And this again highlights to us that Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi, in all of his mannerisms, in all of just the way he was walking, for example, was directly like the way in which the Holy Prophet of Islam would walk. And this is one of the very important narrations in this regard.
Of course, Jabir was again one of the close companions of the Imam. Inshallah, we'll try and look at some of the companions of the Imam as well. Are there any narrations about the childhood of the Imam or the way he was brought up by Imam Sajjad salamullahi alayhi?
So the first thing we understand, 4 years, as we mentioned, of his life were with his grandfather as well. And he mentions that I remember the tragedy of course he is an Imam, I remember the tragedy of Karbala and the masa'ib and the atrocities that took place. So he remembers this. So the early part of his life is of course spent in Karbala, and then coming back from Karbala, going to Kufa and to Syria, and these type of journeys that took place as we know in history. 35 years then are spent under the guidance of his father salamullahi alayhi. With regards to the childhood of the Imam, what we understand primarily is many narrations are found, reports are found of people being amazed by Imam Baqir salamullahi alayhi's ilm. So they would see this child, of course, the Imam of the time is Imam Sajjad, they knew that he is the son of the Imam, and they would be amazed by his ilm, his knowledge, when people would come up to him, for example, and they would say, will you ask us questions or should we ask you? Immediately he'd say, you ask me questions. So they were surprised that this young child, 5, 6, 7, 10 years old, is telling us to ask him questions. And when he would reply on a range of different topics, as inshallah we'll look at, when he would reply, then they would do what we call i'tiraf. They would accept that yes, he is from the progeny of Ahlulbayt alayhim assalam. In other words, from his childhood, it was apparent that he is, number one, the successor because of his virtues, the successor of the fourth Imam. Number two, he is on the level of infallibility. Not that much is known about his life, but we find some of these narrations about his early life, about his answering of questions and dealing with the people with regards to his knowledge and ilm.
With regards to him being in Karbala, do we have any narrations from him about the events that took place? Does he narrate any of the masa'ib that, for example, that we hear?
There were some mu'arrikhin and historians that had actually recorded in their books the masa'ib of Karbala that Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi had mentioned. Many of them have then been lost. But there were even Sunni mu'arrikhin, the famous Tabari. Tabari had recorded many of these narrations, because Tabari mentions the history of Karbala as well. Many narrations from Imam Baqir salamullahi alayhi. And there are some that exist till today from the atrocities that took place with, for example, the great lady Zainab, the great lady Kulthum salamullahi alayhima, and things like this. Again, as I say, many were then lost. We had many documents. Even the books of Maqtal that we have, some were, for example, what we call talkhis, condensed versions of the original books and the original narrations that we had. But we have some material, yes, from Imam Baqir.
Of course, a lot sometimes is said that, you know, if Imam Sajjad if he had been killed in Karbala, there would be no Imam. But isn't Imam Baqir also there? Or is it because Imam Sajjad had a bigger role or to fill?
One thing we can understand is that maybe the situation was such, the political situation, that if a child of 4 years, of course the child of 4-year-old can be an imam. وَلَوْ كَانَ غُلَامًا, as they say in the hadith. Even when he's in the womb of his mother, he is an imam. So of course Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi could be the imam at the age of 4, whatever young age. The political situation was such that, look, Imam Hussein salamullah alayhi has just been killed. Yazid, the tyrant oppressor, has called himself Khalifatul Muslimin. What kind of situation is this? Therefore, then, if a child was to say, I am the Imam, it may have been difficult for people to then say, to then accept. Therefore, it was necessary that Imam Sajjad salamullahi alayhi stayed alive because of his age. Of course, age does not restrict, but people would think that, look, Imam Baqir salamullahi alayhi is so young, how can he be the Imam? And this would then lead to inhiraf and deviation. So because of this issue, because of the situation of the people and how the faith of the people was weakened by Yazid and the Battle of Karbala, it was necessary for Imam Sajjad salamullah alayhi to remain alive and to be the Imam of the Muslimin. Which is why even in the life of Imam Sajjad salamullah alayhi, they say Lady Zainab would travel to different places, mentioning the masa'ib of Imam Hussein and the history and the story and the message of Abu Abdullah salamullah alayhi. But Imam Sajjad would stay in Medina. Why? Because he knew that the time is such that the Imam has to be in one place where people can come to him, access him. So the political volatility and political situation meant that it was completely necessary that Imam Sajjad salamullah alayhi stays alive. But of course Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi was also there with his father.
Just before inshallah we'll go for our first break, let's look at the main characteristics that Imam was known for. Even though inshallah later on we'll look at these in more details. But what were the main characteristics? Obviously we mentioned he was very similar to that of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
We have a hadith from Imam Sadiq salamullah alayhi, كان أبي salamullah alayhi كثير الذكر. He says, wherever I was with my father, he would always be remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, when we were walking with my father, he would be remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we were eating with the people, he would be remembering Allah. When we would be sitting and conversing with the companions, he would still be remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To the extent that I would also always see his lips moving and saying, La ilaha illallah. So one of the main things is that constantly in dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the main qualities of the Imam. Then we look inshallah at more detail of the other qualities that he had. Kana Abu Ja'far, for example, ahsanu nas sawta. Out of the people, he had the best voice. And he would recite Quran in the best of voice, and supplications in the best of voice. Spirituality in this way. The supplications of the Imam during the night time I mentioned in the books. The spirituality. The patience of the Imam, we can look at some of the stories as well. The patience of the Imam when he is insulted. One individual, for example, says, I hated the Imam. I was min al-nawasib, of the nawasib, of the people that hate Ahlulbayt. I hated his grandfather, Amir al-Mu'mineen, salamullah alayhi. Maybe he was like the Khawariji. Yet still I would always be sitting next to him. He said, why you hate him? You openly, not hidden, you openly say you hate Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi. Why are you sitting with him? He said, his akhlaq is so great. Even though he knows I dislike him, he has never disrespected me. Therefore I feel like sitting close to this Imam. Akhlaq, adab, sabr, tahammul, hilm, all of these qualities of the Imam that are found in all of the Ayyam alayhim salam were found in the Imam. That the enemy, when he would come, when he was insulted to his face, he would reply with the best of replies, as inshallah we'll see in more detail. But these are some of the characteristics.
Thank you very much. Inshallah we urge you for a break now. When we come back, we'll try and look at some of his morals, his high morals, the Imam, peace be upon him, his family, his brothers, his children, and then the appointment of his imamat after the martyrdom of Imam Sajjad. Don't go away, inshallah we'll be going for a short break. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to 14 Divine Guides, the show that looks at the lives of the 14 infallibles, Insha'Allah. Today we are looking at the life of Imam Muhammed Baqir, the son of Imam al-Sajjad, the grandson of Imam al-Hussein, peace and salutations be upon him. In the first part, with Al-Hajj Shabbar Mehdi, we looked at the birth of the Imam, the names and the titles of the Imam, a few narrations where the Prophet ﷺ speaks about the coming of the Imam, being the fifth Imam, and sending greetings through Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. And of course we mentioned that Imam al-Baqir was present in Karbala on the day of Ashura, and some of the narrations we have are from Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, peace and salutations be upon him. We understand that he had 4 or 5 brothers. Not a lot is mentioned about all his brothers. Of course we do have their names. The most famous is Zayd al-Shahid. Do we have any narrations about his brothers, and also do we have any narrations about Zayd himself?
As you mentioned, there are about 4 or 5 brothers that are mentioned in the books. Hussein, for example, Abdullah. Zayd is of course the most well known, and we know a bit more about his life than we know about the others. What we do know about the others is, for example, their piety is mentioned in the books, and their ibadah and worship and these characteristics. Not that much else is mentioned. Zayd, as we understand, Zayd al-Shahid, as he is known, who was actually born in the 78th year after Hijrah. So he's of course much younger than Imam al-Baqir sallallahu alayhi. But you find again and again narrations praising him by the Imams themselves. So for example, Imam Baqir sallallahu alayhi said he is full of belief and knowledge. Each hair of his from which you can find knowledge. In other words, his whole body is immersed in ilm and iman and faith. What he was most well known for in history was his opposition towards the Umayyads, as we understand. Hisham bin Abdul Malik in Damascus, Zayd had gone to Damascus. Zayd went to Hisham. Zayd was speaking to Hisham. When Zayd was speaking to Hisham, Hisham had given such a stern reply to Zayd, salamullahi rahmatullahi alayhi, that Zayd decided to oppose him completely and gather together an opposition against Hisham. Because of course Hisham is not the rightful leader of the Muslims. Hisham, for example, had insulted Imam al-Baqir salamullahi alayhi. So we have a story, for example, of an individual coming to Imam al-Baqir and saying, instead of Baqir, Baqara, cow. In other words, you are the Imam of the cow, you are a cow. These type of things. And the Imam says, no, it's not Baqara, it's Baqir. You're pronouncing it incorrectly. This type of taunts. Hisham had done the same thing. He had insulted Imam al-Baqir salamullah alayhi in front of Zayd. Zayd said, I cannot stand here and listen to this oppressive ruler who has taken the right and the haqq of Al Muhammad salamullah alayhim. He then led a revolt, a revolution. The first thing we understand, Imam al-Baqir salamullah alayhi supported Zayd. Of course he did. Just because Imam al-Baqir salamullah alayhi was not with Zayd physically doesn't mean he did not support. Because the Imam has to see what the situation is, whether it is right to stand up against the time, or whether it is better to lay low and do tabligh in the way that the Imam sallallahu alayhi did. For example, Imam al-Mujtaba and his peace treaty, in the ilm of imama, in his knowledge that he was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he had realized the best thing for me to do is to sign this peace treaty. Because the people are not there to support me. In the same way, Imam Hussein salamullah alayhi, first 10 years of his leadership, of his imam, was spent doing what? Doing what Imam al-Mujtaba had done. If Imam Hussein salamullah alayhi was against the peace treaty, then the moment Imam al-Mujtaba had passed away, he would then have revolted against Muawiyah. He didn't do so. Because he realized you have to check the political situation. Who is the leader? Do I have support? What is the geographical location? What time period is it in? Is it better that I stay outside of politics on the apparent level and I help the mu'mineen? Or should I just tell the mu'mineen, let's go and let's revolt against the ruler? So Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi saw that because of the weak situation of the ummah. It was necessary that the Imam is there present in front of them, ready to give them ilm and knowledge. As you said, many of the ahadith we have is because of that time period. So if the Imam had gone with Zayd and been killed, we wouldn't have any of these ahadith. Our fiqh is mainly based on Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq salamullahi alayhim. So if he had gone physically with Zayd and he had, for example, been killed, we wouldn't have all of these treasures of ilm and knowledge that we have. So the Imam supported Zayd. Zayd, we were told, at one point had 40,000 troops with him. Of course, then many had been bought out and sold by Hisham. And Zayd was killed and his body was left on the government building. And his body was burnt and atrocities took place with his body. But Zayd was kept in such a high position by Ahlulbayt alayhim assalam because of his stand. Because of his stand against oppression and dhulm, against the Umayyad government, as we understand. But this is what we know about Zayd. But we understand main point here, Imam al-Baqir did support him and mention his great ilm and knowledge. Some people say, for example, Zayd had called himself the Imam and tried to take away leadership from Imam Baqir. This is incorrect.
The fact that he revolted was because of his brother and the insults that he had by Hisham, of course. Of course, as we mentioned, there's not much on the other brothers. We do, as you mentioned, Hussein, Abdullah, and also Ali the second are his brothers. What about his children? Is there anything mentioned? Of course, we know Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq was the eldest. Did Imam al-Baqir have any other sons?
Yes, there were two sons from the same mother. So Imam al-Sadiq salamullah alayhi's mother is Fatima, the daughter of Qasim, the son of Muhammad, the son of Abu Bakr.
Okay. So
Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, who was basically the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen salamullah alayhi. From that lineage, Fatima, may Allah's peace and blessing be upon her, was the mother of Imam al-Sadiq. She was also the mother of who? Abdullah Aftah. Abdullah Aftah is the brother of Imam al-Sadiq, the son of Imam al-Kadhim. During the formative stage of the imamah and leadership of Imam al-Sadiq salamullah alayhi, Abdullah Aftah, many people thought he was the imam. So we know of Abdullah Aftah. Then we have other sons that less is known about them. For example, Ali. Again, they were from different mothers. But the two that we know, of course, Imam al-Sadiq salamullah alayhi and Abdullah. Abdullah was also quite popular with the people. But there are narrations of, for example, Abdullah sitting with the people and giving masail of fiqh which were incorrect. Then Imam al-Sadiq salamullah alayhi said, look, if you are the imam, you wouldn't give incorrect information. People should revert to the person who has complete knowledge. These were the two sons that we understood from the same mother.
Do we know how many wives Imam al-Baqir had?
Not specifically exactly how many there were. But of course there was more than one.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's look at the knowledge that Imam al-Baqir gained from his father, Imam al-Sajjad. Of course, we understand the famous narration that there was never a time when food was served to Imam al-Sajjad or water was served to the Imam where he wouldn't shed tears and remember his father, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. This obviously affected Imam al-Baqir, seeing his father. Of course, he was there, but seeing his father having to suffer so much every time he remembers his father, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and seeing the supplication of his father. This must have obviously affected Imam Muhammed al-Baqir. How, if so?
Of course, for example, on the deathbed of Imam al-Sajjad salamullah alayhi, Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi has seen his father throughout his life struggling. 35 years, however many years, struggling with the event of Karbala and what happened. You see, Ayatollah Sabzwari, who was in Najaf al-Ashraf. Ayatollah Sabzwari, if you look at a photo of Ayatollah Sabzwari, his eyes were very small, the size of his eyes. So they asked, why, what has happened before, in your early life, your eyes were normal size. He said, in my dream, I saw one picture in my dream, one picture, one stage of Karbala. Whenever I remember it, I begin to cry. So I cried so much by seeing one part of Karbala that my eyes became very small. It affected me physically. So they say, look, Ayatollah Sabzwari, this mujtahid, just by seeing in his dream one small picture of what happened in Karbala was affected this much. What about Imam Sajjad Salamullah alayhi, who went through all of the tragedy? He would cry so much, and people would say, for example, that Shahada is, for example, tradition for you, it's normal for you. Then he would say, Mata kana sabyun nisa lana aada, for example. When was the harassment of our women, our women being taken captive, tradition for us? Yes, Shahada is for us. But when was this for us? An individual, Abu Mandar, for example, comes and says, Ya Imam Sajjad, you have cried too much for your father, Imam Hussein. You're crying too much. So Imam Sajjad Salamullah alayhi looks at him and says, you haven't done justice, Abu Mandar. He says, why? He says, Abu Mandar, if there is a brother who sees the hijab of his sister being taken and his sister being looted by the people, what would happen to that brother? And he cannot do anything. He can't do anything. He's in chains, for example. He's unwell. Abu Mandar said that brother would pass away because of grief. Imam Sajjad says, look, I was unable to pass away. I saw all of these things. Which is why, as you mentioned, whenever food was put in front of him, he would cry and lament for his father, Imam Hussein. And yes, this directly affected Imam al-Baqir, Salamullah alayhi, who also saw what happened with Lady Zainab and Lady Kulthum, who also saw the tragedies that took place on the 10th of Muharram. Which is why there are ahadith لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ ثَوَابٍ إِلَّا الدَّمْعَةَ فِينَا. For everything there is a specific reward. Except for crying for Ahlulbayt alayhim as-salam, there is no specific reward for this. Imam al-Baqir, Imam Sajjad, they were affected directly by this. With regards to specifically your question, a deathbed of Imam Sajjad, Salamullah alayhi. Imam Baqir, Salamullah alayhi, knows how much his father has suffered. So they say, on his deathbed, Imam al-Baqir goes to hug his father and sit on his chest. Straight away, Imam Sajjad begins to cry. As we know, the deathbed of Imam Sajjad, he said, put me on the ground. Because my father, Hussein ibn Ali, Salamullah alayhi, was alone on the ground. When he was on the ground, and Imam Baqir was sitting with him, hugging him, comforting him, Imam Sajjad began to cry. Why? Two reasons. The first is when Imam al-Baqir, Salamullah alayhi, touched the body of Imam Sajjad, those wounds from being a captive of Syria and Kufa were still affecting his body. The second thing is, Imam Sajjad Salamullah alayhi says, I am crying because you are sitting on my chest as I pass away. But who was sitting on the chest of my father Hussein ibn Ali when he was passing away? So Imam Baqir Salamullah alayhi's whole life was spent looking at his father, Imam Sajjad, and the way in which he struggled with the tragedy of Karbala. And this directly affected him as well. For example, they say Imam Baqir Salamullah alayhi gave specific amounts of money. He says, after my death, make sure this money is spent to do what? To hold gatherings of Imam Hussein Salamullah alayhi and his martyrdom. Directly this link from his father that he gained. This intense burning in the heart for what happened on the 10th of Muharram.
Of course, we know it was Al-Walid that poisoned Imam Sajjad Salamullah alayhi. How old was Imam al-Baqir when his father passed away? And second, and maybe more important, is there any narrations that tell us that Imam Sajjad actually appointed Imam Muhammed Baqir as an Imam after him?
So the first part of your question, the Imam was around 39 to 40 years of age. With regards to the appointment, if you look at the books of history of the Aimma, Irshad, all the other books that we have, they will mention first proofs of the Imama of the Imam. So if you look at the fourth Imam, what was the proof that he was the Imam? Fifth Imam, what was the proof? Sixth Imam, what was the proof? With regards to the proof that Imam al-Baqir Salamullah alayhi was the Imam, the first thing we understand is yes, Imam Sajjad Salamullah alayhi had given a will and testimony on his deathbed where followers were present, family members were present, saying that Imam al-Baqir Salamullah alayhi will be the Imam after me. Also, you would find narrations of companions that would come up to Imam Sajjad, Ya Abul Hasan, who will be the Imam after you? And he would, for example, point to Imam al-Baqir. So these were the narrations that we have. The second proofs are given of his virtue, the fact that he was the most virtuous of all of the people. the most in knowledge, the most in helm, the most in ilm.
The Imam of the time has to be the most knowledgeable.
Exactly. Inshallah, we'll look in more depth in another part of the program about all of the qualities. The fact that he had all of these qualities, he was perfect in every way, was also proof. In other words, we have two types of proof. Aqli, rational being that he is the most virtuous, he has the most knowledge, therefore he has to be the Imam. And naqli, the narrations and the reports from Imam Sajjad salamullah alayhi on his deathbed, saying that Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi will be the Imam after me.
Of course, we know Imam al-Baqir buried Imam al-Sajjad, and he was the second Imam to be buried in Jannat al-Baqi'. Well, obviously Imam al-Baqir himself and Imam al-Sadiq are buried. What was the Islamic state in at the time of the Imam taking Imamate, and it was because of the state that the Imam was involved in knowledge?
The first thing we understand, the Quran says, وَمَا جَعَلْنَا الرَّؤْيَا الَّتِي أَرَيْنَاكَ إِلَّا فِتْنَةً لِلنَّاسِ وَالشَّجَرَةَ الْمَلْعُونَةَ فِي الْقُرْآنِ. Referring to the Holy Prophet of Islam. We showed you in the dream this accursed tree. In other words, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw in his dream monkeys on his mimbar, he inquired about this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, this is shajaratul mal'una, the accursed tree. The Quran mentions shajaratul khabitha and shajaratul mal'una. Shajaratul mal'una, the accursed tree, refers to who? Banu Umayyah. Banu Umayyah, as you highlighted, and we spoke about previously, the Khulafa were during the time of the Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi. But this was the end of their period. The Abbasids are who? Abbasids take their line from Abbas, the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. The Abbasids were leading a revolt in areas such as Khurasan, individuals such as Abu Muslim. And the situation was such that the Umayyads were losing power. Therefore, the Umayyads had other things to concentrate upon rather than solely concentrating on Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi. So during other times, the rulers could fully concentrate on undermining and destroying the influence and the power of the Imam of the time, as they did with the other Imam. For example, Imam Rida salamullah alayhi, Imam al-Kadhim salamullah alayhi. Because the Abbasids were in rule, they could 100% concentrate on making the lives of the Imams salamullah alayhim difficult. Because the Umayyads were in such a situation where they had their own inner conflicts, their own inner disputes and discrepancies, they were fighting amongst each other. Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi realized, if I stay in Medina, if I stay away from Zahiran, apparently going in politics, I will be able to maximize the benefit for the people. Because they are busy with their own disputes. If I then go out and stand up against them, then they will notice me. If I stay here, they will not notice me as much in this way. And so he stayed in Medina, and he founded the University of Medina. And in reality, it was a university because of all of the different ulum that was studied in Medina that the Imam salamullah alayhi would teach, along with his son Imam al-Sadiq salamullah alayhi. So because the situation was such, an opportunity was found, which is why this is called the golden era of hadith as well, of our hadith. An opportunity was found to make as many documents. We'll look inshallah at some of the documents. Make as many documents as we can about, for example, fiqh and ahadith. Our books of hadith come from the documents made during the time of Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq salamullah alayhima. So we have usul al-Kafi, al-Kafi, Istibsar, Tahdhib al-Ahkam, Man la yahdharuhu al-Faqih. They came from the narrations that were given during that time. So because the situation was such, the Imam could maximize the benefit to the people, as you said, with his ilm and knowledge.
And just before we go for a break, we believe that Imam lived all his life in Medina, but there was some small period that he spent in Damascus. When was this? Was this before the martyrdom of Imam Sajjad, or was it after? And what was the reasons for him?
So this was after the martyrdom of Imam Sajjad salamullah alayhi. Hisham bin Abdul Malik, the Umayyad Khalif, had wanted to bring the Imam to Damascus to reduce his activities in Medina. So of course they didn't completely ignore Ahlulbayt. They knew Ahlulbayt are working and spreading the true madhab. So he brought the Imam to Syria, to Sham, And he wanted to embarrass. All of the Khulafa, this was their practice. They would call the A'immah Salamullah alayhi in their public gatherings in order to embarrass them. So Hisham was playing archery. So he gave the bow and arrow to Imam Baqir Salamullah alayhi. In other words, to show, look, he may be good in fiqh and these type of things, but in practicality and these type of areas, we'll show that we're better than him. So they say the Imam hits one arrow exactly on the bullseye. Another one hits that other arrow and breaks it off. So again, perfectly hitting the same spot. So the arrow that was there before, the second arrow hits it and causes it to fall off. He does this about 10 times. Hisham is surprised. He says, Ya Baqir, I didn't know you were that good in archery. The Imam says, we, the Ahlulbayt alayhim wassalam, are perfect in all of our attributes. Whether it be ilm, whether it be physical attributes, whether it be on the battlefield. Hisham calling Imam al-Sadiq and Imam Baqir, both were called together, realized that it is better that I keep him in Medina. If I keep him in Damascus, people will then begin to follow him and become obedient to him. So he had called him originally to take away the influence that he was having in Medina. He had called him in Syria, why? To undermine his authority, to disrespect him, to dishonor him. When he saw the virtue of Imam al-Baqir salamullahi alayhi, he sent him therefore back to Medina, where the rest of his life, as we understand, was spent. So this is why he had gone to Damascus.
Thank you very much. Inshallah, we'll be going for our second break, and in the final part, we'll try and look at this new era of time, the golden era, where the Imam used this time to spread the knowledge of the Ahlulbayt salamullahi alayhi, and a lot of, as Al-Hajj mentioned, a lot of our fiqh is through the documents we have through Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq. Inshallah, we will look at that after this short break. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to 14 Divine Guides. We are discussing the life of Imam al-Baqir, peace and salutations be upon him and his family. Just before the break, we mentioned that the Islamic State was in some confusion, or where we had the Abbasids trying to take power, and it was the end of the Umayyad regime. Because of this reason, we mentioned the Imam turns away from political movement, as he did from the start of his imamate, or from even the start of Imam Sajjad's imamate. When he comes back to Medina, Imam Sajjad salamullah alayhi, he does not get involved in any political movements. And then when Zayd has the revolution, Imam al-Baqir supports him, but he still stays in Medina and does not oppose the regime. Can we say, the first question, can we say the Imam, maybe when he sees the Umayyad at such a weak point, why did the Imam not try to take power for himself instead of spreading the knowledge?
He mentions himself that if I would have the supporters to do so, I would have risen up in the way that my brother Zayd had done. This is mentioned in the hadith. Because I do not think I have this many supporters and they're not ready, they're not at that level of iman and faith and obedience to me to rise up and be willing to give their lives, I'm not going to do so. So this was the main reason. Yes, there were people that would come up to the A'immah alayhim wassalam. Many people would come to the A'immah and say, we are ready to fight with you. There was an example given of an individual who was standing with the Imam. And the Imam says, look, people are passing by. Ask them if they can see me. Can they see me? So the people that were passing by, he stops one of them and says, can you see Imam al-Baqir salamullah alayhi? He looks around and he says, no. The Imam was standing right there. He says, I can't see him. Second person comes, can you see the Imam? No idea. Third person, fourth person. Then a blind man comes. He says, stop this blind man. He says, can you see the Imam? He says, yes, he's standing right in front of me. He says, how you are blind? He says, the Imam is not seen by these eyes. The Imam is seen by this heart. The faith and the iman that is within this heart of yours allows you to see the Imam and believe in the Imam. So the Aimma alayhim as-salam would often say, yes, people say that they support us. People say that they support us, but this is just on their tongue and not found in their heart. Therefore, the Imam salamullah alayhi did not rise up. As you said, it was a good opportunity. Umayyads are weak, they have their own disputes. Abbasids are trying to also take power. This is a great time to completely attack and take the whole government under the hands of Ahlulbayt alayhim as-salam. However, because supporters were not there, the Imam salamullah alayhi, in his knowledge, the knowledge that he had, the knowledge given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ilma kan wa ma yakun, he stayed away from doing so. And we also understand during the life of Imam al-Baqir salamullah alayhi, one of the khulafa was by the name of Umar ibn al-Abdul Aziz. The fifth, if I'm not mistaken, Khalif of the Umayyads. He, as we know, was not as bad as the others. Why? As we understand, he gave back the land of Fadak. He would give 1/5 the khums that was due to be given to Ahlul Bayt. He would give this to them. He stopped the cursing of Amir al-Mu'mineen salamullah alayhi from the pulpits. He wasn't completely, someone that we are in support of. Why? Because he was still the Khalif. He was still, taking the seat of the Imam, even though he helped the Imam in these ways. Umar bin Abdul Aziz, by seeing the way in which he was acting with the Holy Imam salamullah alayhi, was poisoned by his own family members. And then we understand the other Khalif that came by the name of Yazid bin Abdul Malik. Yazid bin Abdul Malik then wrote to the governor of Medina, because he wasn't in Medina. He wrote to the governor of Medina, he said, poison al-Baqir. Poison him, kill him. We've killed Umar bin Abdul Aziz because he was supporting him so much. Just kill Muhammad al-Baqir. The governor of Medina writes back and saying, I am not completely disobeying your orders. However, I have a suggestion. This al-Baqir is the most righteous of all of the people. He's most righteous. There is no one like him in his ibadah, in his worship, in his dealings with the people. Therefore, I advise you not to even bother to try and kill him, because his status is very high in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, they would try. Umar bin Abdul Aziz had made it slightly easier for Imam al-Baqir salamullah alayhi to spread the message. Other individuals did try and kill the Imam before he was eventually poisoned. But because the Imam knew that I do not have the number of supporters, I have to concentrate on ilm. Second point, if you look in the history and the development of Islamic law as a tradition, many of the Umayyad Khulafa would send udhat, judges, to different regions. This Qadi is going to go to this area, this Qadi is going to go to this area, this Chief Justice will be in Medina, for example. When he was asked, how should we rule, how should we judge Islamic law? Umar bin Abdul Aziz replied, if there are no traditions that you find, give your own opinion. This is tragedy. Give your own opinion. Therefore, Imam al-Baqir salamullah alayhi realized that when the Umayyads are spreading this type of propaganda that, judge in the way that you want to judge, it is therefore absolutely imperative that I stay in Medina and teach the people the way in which Islamic law should be taught and preached to them. Which is why he understood it was more important to spread the teachings of the Holy Prophet of Islam sallallahu alaihi wa alihi in Medina, rather than trying to attack and confront the Umayyad political leaders.
Thank you very much. I think it's quite important to look at what state the Imam was living in. The Abbasids, they actually take power while Imam al-Baqir was the Imam, or was it during the lifetime of Imam
no, this
Ja'far
was
al-Sadiq?
Afterwards.
So this was afterwards, after the life of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. Let's try and look at this golden era. When did it actually sort of start, and what were the steps being taken by the Imam? Was it publicly the Imam would give, was it lessons that he was giving? Was it masail, like fiqh questions he was answering? Was it a school that he built? How did this sort of golden era start?
So as we understand, Masjid al-Nabawi has always been the center point. Sometimes we look today at the mosques that we have, and sometimes we see that our mosques, yes, are 100% there for salah and commemoration of the tragedy of Ahlulbayt, which is very important. But we sometimes often forget that one of the roles of the mosque is also for ilm and knowledge, and the way that the mosque of the Holy Prophet of Islam was. So Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi took this Masjid al-Nabawi as the center for all of his teachings. And the way in which they would have classes was, for example, the Imam would sit at one end of the mosque. People would then gather. Public, whoever wants to come can gather. And a whole range of masail would be spoken about. Not just fiqh. Of course, fiqh was one of the main topics. Theology, because don't forget, this is a time when theologically there are many disputes. The Ash'ari, the Mu'tazili, the Karami, the Batini, some that came later, some that were there during the time. All of these disputes, all of these theological issues. Can I see Allah? How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talk? Is the Quran originated? Has the Quran always been there? Issues like this. And so the Imam would sit and debate and speak with his companions. And this is how it started. That he was given the opportunity to sit and actually give benefit to the people. Other Imam alayhim as-salam would also have been able to do such, but they were, for example, placed in the prison. Imam al-Qadim salamullah alayhi could have done the same thing. Many of our Imam alayhim as-salam would, for example, go into the gardens of their house. Sit in the garden, people would come and they would teach. For example, Imam Jawad salamullah alayhi. Imam al-Baqir, because he had Medina as a city, and Medina as a city has always been a very interesting city with regards to ilm and knowledge. Many historians, Zuhri, for example, Ibn Ishaq, many muhaddithin have been in Medina. So the Imam saw this opportunity and he would sit with this opportunity to sit publicly and benefit the people. And people would come from all areas in the way in which the system worked, that when you would hear that there is a certain master who is giving knowledge like no one else is giving, automatically people would join. And a large following, many groups of people would come to study under the Imam. The golden period, one of the most important things that took place during this golden period is by the name of Al-Usul Al-Arba'a Mi'ah, the 400 treaties. What were these 400 treaties? The Imam, both Imam Al-Baqir salamullah alayhi and Imam Al-Sadiq salamullah alayhi, would give narrations, ahadith, and they would tell their companions to then collect these in it ended up being collected in 400 different treaties on different topics. One, for example, on ahkam, or for example, tahara. One, for example, on aqaid. One for the life of the Holy Prophet of Islam sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. All of these were collected, the 400 treaties, arba'amiyah. These were then kept. What then happened is later on, when Abbasids realized that these gems of knowledge have been recorded, they destroyed them. And so we had only a handful that were left. From these handful, from these few that we had left out of the 400, scholars such as Muhammad ibn Yaqub al-Kulayni, who is of course the compiler of Al-Kafi, by the name of Thiqatul Islam, he was on Thiqatul Islam. He went and found wherever he could maybe one of these treaties. And from there our hadith books were collected. Originally there were 400, so imagine how much we would have had if all of those treaties were passed down to us. Muhammad ibn Muslim, for example, one of the key companions of the Imam, had stacked all of these narrations. He was put in jail. Okay, some say that he had all his books with him, all of the narrations written down, all of the ulum, all of the knowledge. He was in jail. He realized that if these Abbasids find all of these books, they will do what? They will burn them, they will destroy them. So he hid them within a wall. Okay? He passed away, no one knew where those narrations were. So they were also lost. So imagine how much we would have had if these narrations and these documents were not lost. But one of the main things that took place were these 400 treaties, Al-Usul Arba'amia, which were compiled during the time of Imam Baqir, Imam Sadiq Salamullahi alayhima, from which all of these narrations and all of these ulum are extracted for us till today. Even though we have only a very small, minute part of them.
It's beautiful when we look at the lives of the 14 infallibles. When we look at Imam Sajjad's life, we see his many supplications, and we have Sahifa Sajjadiyya, which we have such du'as as Du'a Makaram al-Akhlaq and Du'a Abu Hamza, and in his time you see he spent looking at supplications and du'as, and we get the du'as. And then in the life of Imam al-Baqir, it changes to more fiqh and jurisprudence and theology. But again, just the same characteristics as Imam Sajjad, Imam al-Baqir would have as well. But as you mentioned in the first part, they're more visible. A certain characteristic is more visible. But Imam al-Baqir also was pious and had his supplications, and his piety and worship showed in front of the people. Do we have any narrations about his worship, the Imam's worship and his piety?
Imam Sadiq Salamullahi alayhi said, whenever I would want to go to sleep, I would first wait for my father. So I'd put down his bed. And what would happen is whenever I would put down his bed, I would be waiting for him, and he would not be there. And so I would go into the masjid. When I would go into the masjid, I would see that the whole masjid is empty and the Imam is standing there supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Other than this narrated, in other words, the amount of ibadah that he would do alone in the night time, with absence of sleep. Other than that, you find certain supplications mentioned of the Imam in the books. His supplication, for example, during the night prayer, Salatul Layl, and how he would supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So yes, of course, these are mentioned. As you said, Imam Sajjad Salamullah alayhi, yes, was well known for this, but all of the Aimma, their supplications, the way in which they would go to Hajj is very famous. All of the Aimma alayhi salam, they would walk to Hajj barefoot, some of them, sometimes, giving away all that they had. All of the property that they had, they would give away, then they would go to Hajj. Then they would return. So these were all mentioned also about Imam al-Baqir Salamullahi alayhi, his Hajj, his obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the night time, his crying and lamenting in the night time.
The last, inshallah, 5 minutes, we'll try and see how the Imam, first of all, was seen by others, whether it's his enemies like Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, and also by his companions like Jabir and other companions. And my question is, in other sects of Islam, do they use Imam al-Baqir's narrations and hadiths? And is he, if there's a hadith narrated by him, is it taken as for example, a Sahih hadith from other sects in Islam? Of course, we know any hadith with us when it comes from Imam Sadiq or Imam al-Baqir, then it's always Haddathani Abi and Jaddi. It's always, we know the link is from him to his father Imam al-Sajjad, to his father Imam al-Hussein, and so on, to his father Imam Ali, from the prophets, from Jibreel, from Allah. So we know the hadith is Sahih. But are they taken, are other sects taking the hadith from Imam al-Baqir Salamullah alayhi?
So the first part of the question, the viewpoints of other individuals. Shaykh Mufid mentions in his Irshad that when these big fuqaha and jurists, as I said, Medina was a very grand city for ilm. When these big fuqaha and jurists would come, they would sit in front of the Imam like a small child sits in front of his father. Other reports say that the jurists of Medina, when they would sit with other people, they would be very confident. When they sat with Imam al-Baqir Salamullahi alayhi, they would be shivering out of the fear of what great personality this Imam Salamullahi alayhi had. And as you have mentioned, whether you look at within Sufism, whether you look at, for example, Sunni Islam, both of these, as in the spiritual Islamic side as well as the Sunni Islam, both take Imam al-Baqir salamullahi alayhi as one of their leaders and masters. So many individuals praised Imam Baqir. I'll give you an example. Zuhri was one of the very famous historians. Zuhri was from Medina as well. He says there was no Qurayshi better than Imam Baqir sallallahu alayhi. No person from Quraysh have I ever seen better than al-Baqir. Waqidi is an individual. He has a book by the name of Kitabul Maghazi. Waqidi. He was also a very famous historian. He came after Ibn Ishaq. Zuhri, his student Ibn Ishaq. Waqidi came after Ibn Ishaq. Waqidi says, the most wonderful of all people in worship and piety was al-Baqir. The Sunni tradition takes Imam Baqir as a teacher. Of course, we take him as Imam. They take him just as a teacher of ulum. With regards to the narrating of Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi in their ahadith, here again we find, for example, Imam Sadiq salamullah alayhi, Bukhari, Sahih Bukhari, completely ignores the narrations of many of our Imam alayhim salam. Very few are found of Imam Sadiq, Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi. Even though they were teachers of their great masters, very few narrations are found from their life. However, if you look in the books of history, they would always mention that so and so, for example, his teacher was Muhammad al-Baqir, his teacher was Ja'far al-Sadiq. But then they ignore the fact that they were the best of the people. They ignore to take narrations from them, traditions from them. And there was also a reasoning behind this. But yes, of course, people like these Sunni historians, as you mentioned, Zuhri, Ibn Ishaq and others, would accept the fact that Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi was the greatest of the people. And as we saw, the enemies of the Imam also would accept him to be the greatest of people. The way in which he would, narrations say, whenever we would be met by our holy Imam salamullah alayhi, he would have gifts with him. And he would say, is there anything better than giving gifts to your fellow brother in faith? Sometimes he would spend 1,000 dinar on us and our gifts. So his mannerisms, wherever he went, whatever he did, convinced the people that even though we don't want to accept his wilaya, we know that he is the greatest of individuals. And this has been the case for all of the Imams. Their character has been such that Imam Sadiq salamullah alayhi is killed by who? Mansur. When Mansur kills the Imam, poisons the Imam, sends the order to poison the Imam, the person comes back and says, I've done it. I've poisoned Imam Sadiq. What does Mansur do? He cries for a very long time. He weeps and shed tears. They said, you were the one that sent the order. He says, yes, but of course I knew that he was the best of the people. Same thing with Imam Baqir salamullah alayhi. People accepted he was the best of the people. But many of the scholars tried to ignore Ahlulbayt alayhim salam in their traditions because they did not want people to start accepting them and the madhab of Ahlulbayt, which is why many ahadith were kept away from in their books.
Thank you very much. Inshallah, the viewers have benefited from our brief show. Inshallah, in the next show we will try and look at the spread of this knowledge. We'll try and look at some narrations and traditions that we have. We will try and see how the some of these traditions were documented and how they benefited us today. How the scholars use these hadiths to come to a certain ruling from the hadith of Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq. Inshallah, we will be joined again by Al-Hajj Shabbar Mehdi for the next show. We will see you then. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.